大家好，我是 Jenny， 欢迎来到沉思者 J。 今天我们要说的故事发生在地球上最遥远、最荒凉的地方，那里是南极洲，零下几十度的冰雪世界，狂风像恶魔一样嚎叫，海浪高达10几公尺。就在这样的绝境之中，一个男人做出了一个奇迹，他把28个人全部带回了家，一个也没少。他的名字叫恩斯特沙克尔顿，人类探险史上最伟大的领导者之一。1874年2月15日，恩斯特沙克尔顿出生在爱尔兰，家里排行老二，父亲是一位农场主人，后来带着全家搬到伦敦。小恩斯特从小就是个不安分的孩子，他不喜欢坐在教室里读书，他喜欢冒险，喜欢探索未知的世界。16岁那年，他做了一个让所有人跌破眼镜的决定，他离开学校，去当了一名商船见习水手，从此踏上了大海。在那个年代，商船的生活并不轻松，长途航行，风浪颠簸，艰苦的环境磨练出沙克尔顿的意志。他从见习水手一路晋升为船长资格，他的航海技术越来越纯熟，对大海的渴望也越来越强烈。但他心中有一个更大的梦想，他要去南极，那个当时几乎没有人踏足的地方。机会在1901年来了，英国探险家罗伯特·史考特要率领发现号远征队前往南极，沙克尔顿成功加入了这次远征。这是他第一次踏上南极的土地，第一次感受到那种超乎想象的严酷，极低的气温，呼啸的暴风雪，无边无际的冰原。这一切不但没有吓到他，反而让他更加着迷。只是这一次，他因为身体健康问题，提前被送回英国。这件事让他耿耿于怀，他发誓一定要再回来。回到英国之后，沙克尔顿没有闲着，他四处奔走筹集资金。在1907年，他组织了自己的第一次南极探险，这一次叫做英勇号远征。他率领队伍向南极点进发，最终抵达了距离南极点仅有170公里的地方，创下了当时人类到达最南端的纪录。但沙克尔顿做了一个令所有人震惊的决定，他宣布撤退。为什么？因为继续前进，他们的粮食就不够回来了。他后来说了一句名言：一个活着的驴子，远比一个死去的狮子有价值。这句话展现了他对生命的态度，也展现了他作为领导者的智慧。1912年，挪威探险家阿蒙森率先抵达南极点，英国的史考特也抵达了，但史考特和队员们在回程中全部遇难，南极点已经被征服了。沙克尔顿需要一个新的目标，他想出了一个更疯狂的计划，穿越南极大陆，从威德尔海这一侧进入，穿越整个南极大陆，从罗斯海那一侧出来，全程超过2800公里，没有任何人尝试过这件事。这就是后来举世闻名的帝国横越南极远征。据说他在真人广告上写着：诚征壮士，前往危险旅程，薪水微薄，酷寒难耐，几个月的黑暗，持续危险，安全归来毫无保障，万一成功，唯有荣耀与认可。不管这则广告是否真实存在，报名参加的人却多达几千人。最终沙克尔顿从中挑选了56名队员，分成2个分队，主队28人乘坐坚忍号，罗斯海分队另外出发，负责在另一侧布置补给站。1914年12月5日，坚忍号进入威德尔海，这里是世界上最危险的海域之一，海面上漂浮着巨大的浮冰，随着洋流移动，坚忍号在滨海中小心翼翼地前进，但命运并不眷顾他们。1915年1月19日，坚忍号被浮冰包围了，船动弹不得，就这样被困在滨海之中。接下来的几个月，坚忍号随着浮冰漂移，队员们每天都在等待冰层融化的时机，等待重新出发的机会。沙克尔顿努力维持整个团队的士气，他组织大家进行各种活动，冬天里在冰上赛狗，排练戏剧表演，庆祝帝国日，聚在一起唱歌。 他把自己最温暖的睡袋给了最虚弱的队员，他亲自把最后一块饼干塞到了法兰克·怀尔德的手中。法兰克后来说，沙克尔顿从不把自己的利益放在第一位，他总是先想到别人。然而冰的力量是无情的，巨大的冰压不断挤压着船身。1915年11月21日，在被困了将近10个月之后，坚忍号终于撑不住了，船身断裂，缓缓沉入了冰冷的海底。队员们眼睁睁看着他们的船消失在海面之下。沙克尔顿站在冰上，看着沉船，他告诉自己的队员，不要难过，我们的船走了，但我们还在，我们要想办法回家。现在他们的处境极为艰难，28个人被困在南极的浮冰上，身边只有3艘救生艇，还有有限的食物和补给。最近的陆地在几百公里之外。沙克尔顿制定了计划，等待浮冰向陆地方向漂移，再伺机出发。1916年4月9日，浮冰开始破裂，机会来了。3艘救生艇同时出发，在冰冷的威德尔海中航行，巨浪拍打着小小的救生艇，海水不断涌入船内。队员们轮流划桨，轮流睡眠，手套湿了结冻了，手脚都麻木了。7天之后，他们抵达了向导，这是他们500天以来第一次踏上陆地。有些队员跪在地上亲吻沙滩，有些人哭了，但沙克尔顿知道，这只是第一步。向导太偏远了，根本不在任何航运路线上，没有船会经过这里，他们必须自己去求救。1916年4月24日，沙克尔顿做出了他生命中最重要的决定之一，他亲自带领5名队员，乘坐最大的救生艇詹姆斯·凯尔德号，向南乔治亚岛进发。那是一个有捕鲸站的小岛，距离向导1300公里，在南大洋上。1300公里是什么概念？那是地球上风浪最大的海域，波涛汹涌，巨浪连天。一艘只有 6.7 公尺长的小救生艇，6个人前进1300公里，这简直是不可能完成的任务，但沙克尔顿做到了。17天之后，詹姆斯·凯尔德号抵达南乔治亚岛，然而命运再次捉弄了他们。他们在岛屿的南侧登陆，而捕鲸站在北侧，中间隔着岛屿上的奥拉搜斯山脉。这片山脉从未有人穿越过，没有地图，没有向导，冰雪覆盖，悬崖峭壁，但他们没有时间绕道，船太破了，不能再出海了，只有翻山一条路。1916年5月19日凌晨，沙克尔顿带着2名最强壮的队员，沃斯利和克里恩，踏上了翻越山脉的旅程。3个人，一条绳子，一把冰斧，就这样翻越了51公里的山路，历时36小时，没有停下来睡觉，因为一旦停下来睡着了，就再也醒不过来了。他们在黎明前抵达了斯特罗姆内斯捕鲸站，守站工人看到3个衣衫褴褛、胡子满面的男人走进来，不敢相信自己的眼睛。沙克尔顿平静地说：“我是沙克尔顿。”那个工人后来说，那一刻他哭了。现在最重要的事情是回头救出向岛上的22名队员，他们在那里已经等了好几个月了。沙克尔顿先后尝试了3次救援，但都因为冰层太厚被迫折返。他心急如焚，每一天等待都是煎熬。终于在第4次尝试，借助智利政府提供的耶尔乔号船，1916年8月30日，沙克尔顿抵达向岛。他透过船上的望远镜，一个一个地数着海岸上的人影，1、2、3，一直数到22。他低下头，流下了眼泪。28个人，一个也没有少，全部声旋。这个奇迹是怎么发生的？不只是运气，更是沙克尔顿的领导力。我们来看看他在这段旅程中的几个关键决策。第一个，弃船。当坚忍号开始沉没，沙克尔顿毫不犹豫地下令弃船，没有人留下来试图抢救船上的物资，因为他知道，最重要的东西不是物资，是人。第二个， 詹姆斯·凯尔德号的航行，明知道风险极大，他依然亲自带队出发。他不是把任务交给别人，他自己冲在最前面。第三个，翻越山脉。这个决定需要极大的勇气，因为谁也不知道翻越成功的几率有多高，但不翻越，就没有任何希望。沙克尔顿选择了最难的路，因为那是唯一的路。在整个旅程中，沙克尔顿的领导风格有几个特点：他把队员的生命放在第一位，他从不让队员看到自己的恐惧和绝望，他用行动而不是言语鼓励大家，他亲自承担最艰难的任务，他公平对待每一个人，无论职位高低。后世的管理学者对沙克尔顿的领导力赞叹不已。哈佛商学院从1998年开始，将坚忍号远征纳入工商管理硕士的课程，作为危机领导力的经典案例。美国太空总署和谷歌等机构也把沙克尔顿的故事用在企业培训中。一个100多年前的南极探险家，成了现代企业管理的典范。法兰克·怀尔德后来这样评价沙克尔顿：他是我见过的最伟大的领导者，不是因为他最聪明，也不是因为他最强壮，而是因为他愿意牺牲个人的目标，全心全意为团队服务。沙克尔顿的一生充满了探险精神，在帝国横越远征之后，他并没有停下脚步。1921年，已经47岁的他，再次出发前往南极，这是他的第4次南极探险。然而旅程还没有开始多久，1922年1月5日，沙克尔顿在南乔治亚岛因心脏病突发离世，享年47岁。他的老朋友法兰克·怀尔德把他安葬在南乔治亚岛，那个他曾经翻山越岭寻找的小岛，就成了他永远的家。沙克尔顿留给我们的，不只是那段惊天动地的南极故事，更是一种精神，在最绝望的时刻，依然选择相信，依然选择前进，依然选择把别人放在自己前面。也许我们这一生不会遇到南极的冰海，不会在零下几十度的暴风雪中挣扎，但我们都会遇到自己的绝境。那个时候，想想沙克尔顿，想想那28个人，在冰冷的海上，互相依靠，从未放弃。一个人的勇气，可以点燃27个人的希望。一个好的领导者，不是站在最高处俯视众人，而是走在最前面，带着大家穿越黑暗。这就是沙克尔顿告诉我们的故事。感谢你今天和 Jenny 一起走进这段历史，我们下次见咯。Hello everyone, I'm Jenny. Welcome to Thinker J. Today we travel to the most remote and desolate place on Earth, the continent of Antarctica. A world of ice and snow where temperatures drop dozens of degrees below zero, where winds howl like demons, where waves tower 15 meters high. In the very heart of this frozen hell, one man performed a miracle. He brought 28 people home alive, every single one of them. His name was Ernest Shackleton, one of the greatest leaders in the entire history of human exploration. Ernest Shackleton was born on February 15, 1874, in Ireland. He was the second child in his family. His father was a farmer who later moved the whole family to London. From a young age, Ernest was a restless child. He had no interest in sitting in classrooms. He wanted adventure. He wanted to explore the unknown. At the age of 16, he made a decision that shocked everyone around him. He left school. He became a merchant sailor apprentice. And from that moment on, the sea became his world. Life aboard a merchant ship in those days was far from easy. Long voyages, rough seas. The harsh conditions forged Shackleton into a man of extraordinary willpower. He worked his way up from apprentice to earning his captain's certificate. His seamanship grew stronger with every journey, and his hunger for something greater grew right alongside it. He had a dream burning inside him. He wanted to go to Antarctica, that place where almost no human being had ever set foot. His chance came in 1901. British explorer Robert Falcon Scott was organizing the Discovery Expedition to Antarctica. Shackleton successfully joined the team. This was his first time setting foot on Antarctic soil. His first encounter with that unimaginable severity. The bone-crushing cold. The howling blizzards. The endless white expanse of ice stretching to every horizon. None of it frightened him. In fact, it made him more captivated than ever. However, during this expedition, health problems forced him to return to England early. This bothered him deeply. He swore he would return. Back in England, Shackleton wasted no time. He threw himself into fundraising and organizing. By 1907, he was leading his own Antarctic expedition. This was called the Nimrod Expedition. He pushed his team southward toward the South Pole. They ultimately reached a point just 170 kilometers from the pole itself, setting a new world record for the farthest south any human had ever traveled. But then Shackleton made a decision that stunned everyone. He ordered a retreat. Why? Because if they continued forward, they would not have enough food to make it back alive. He later said something that became a famous quote: "A live donkey is better than a dead lion." That sentence revealed everything about his attitude toward life, and everything about his wisdom as a leader. In 1912, Norwegian explorer Roald Amundsen became the first person to reach the South Pole. British explorer Robert Scott also reached it. But Scott and his men all perished on the return journey. The South Pole had been conquered. Shackleton needed a new goal. And he came up with something even more audacious. He would cross the entire Antarctic continent, entering from the Weddell Sea side, crossing all the way through, and emerging from the Ross Sea side. A total distance of more than 2,800 kilometers. No human being had ever attempted this. This became the legendary Imperial Trans-Antarctic Expedition. According to a story that has been told many times since, Shackleton reportedly placed an advertisement seeking men for the journey. It said he wanted men for a dangerous expedition. Low wages, bitter cold, months of complete darkness, constant danger, and no guarantee of safe return. If the expedition succeeded, the only reward would be honor and recognition. Whether that advertisement was exactly as described or not remains uncertain. But what is certain is that thousands of men applied. Shackleton selected 56 men in total. The main party of 28 would sail on the ship called Endurance. A separate Ross Sea support party would set out to lay supply depots from the other side. On December 5, 1914, the Endurance entered the Weddell Sea. This is one of the most dangerous stretches of ocean on Earth. Massive sheets of sea ice drift with the currents. The Endurance picked her way carefully through the frozen labyrinth. But fate was not kind. On January 19, 1915, the ship became trapped. Surrounded on all sides by pack ice, the Endurance was stuck. She drifted helplessly, locked inside the frozen sea. For the next several months, the ship drifted with the ice. The crew waited day after day for the ice to loosen and release them. Shackleton worked tirelessly to keep the team's spirits up. He organized games and activities. In the dark of winter they held dog sled races on the ice. They performed theatrical shows for each other. They celebrated Empire Day. They gathered together and sang songs. Shackleton gave his own warmest sleeping bag to the weakest crew member. He pressed the last biscuit into Frank Wild's hands with his own. Frank later said that Shackleton never put his own interests first. He always thought of others before himself. But the power of ice is merciless. The enormous pressure of the shifting floes crushed the hull of the ship. On November 21, 1915, after nearly 10 months trapped in the ice, the Endurance finally gave way. Her hull cracked. She sank slowly into the frozen sea. The men stood on the ice and watched their ship disappear beneath the surface. Shackleton stood among them. He watched the ship go down. And then he turned to his men. He told them not to despair. The ship was gone. But they were still here. And they were going to find a way home. Their situation was now extremely grave. 28 men stranded on the Antarctic pack ice. 3 lifeboats. Limited food and supplies. The nearest land hundreds of kilometers away. Shackleton formed a plan. They would wait for the ice to drift toward land. Then seize their chance. On April 9, 1916, the ice began to break up. The moment had come. All 3 lifeboats launched at once. They pushed out into the freezing waters of the Weddell Sea. Enormous waves battered the tiny boats. Seawater flooded in constantly. The men took turns rowing, taking turns sleeping. Their gloves froze solid with water. Their hands and feet went numb. 7 days later, they reached Elephant Island. For the first time in 500 days, they stood on solid ground. Some men fell to their knees and kissed the shore. Some wept. But Shackleton knew this was only the beginning. Elephant Island was too remote. It lay completely outside any shipping routes. No ship would ever come this way. They had to go and find help themselves. On April 24, 1916, Shackleton made one of the most consequential decisions of his life. He personally led 5 men into the largest of the 3 lifeboats, the one called James Caird. They set out for South Georgia Island, a small island with a whaling station, 1,300 kilometers away, across the Southern Ocean. What does 1,300 kilometers mean in the Southern Ocean? It means the most savage seas on Earth, mountainous waves, screaming winds, a tiny 6.7-meter boat, 6 men, and 1,300 kilometers to go. It seemed like an impossible mission, but Shackleton accomplished it. 17 days later, the James Caird reached South Georgia Island. Yet fate dealt them another cruel hand. They had landed on the southern side of the island. The whaling station was on the northern side, separated by the Allardyce mountain range, which had never been crossed by any human being. No maps, no guide, covered in ice and snow, sheer cliffs at every turn. But they had no time to sail around. The James Caird was too battered to go back to sea. The only option was to cross those mountains on foot. In the early hours of May 19, 1916, Shackleton set out with his 2 strongest men, Frank Worsley and Tom Crean. 3 men, 1 rope, 1 ice axe. They crossed 51 kilometers of uncharted mountain terrain. It took 36 hours. Without sleep. Because if they stopped and fell asleep in that cold, they would never wake up again. They arrived at Stromness whaling station just before dawn. The station workers saw 3 ragged, frost-encrusted men walking in from the mountains. They could not believe their eyes. Shackleton calmly told them who he was. One of the workers later recalled that he wept at hearing those words. Now the most urgent task was to go back and rescue the 22 men waiting on Elephant Island. They had been there for months. Shackleton tried 3 times to reach them, but thick ice turned him back each time. He was consumed with anxiety. Every day of waiting was agony. Finally, on the 4th attempt, using a ship called the Yelcho provided by the Chilean government, on August 30, 1916, Shackleton reached Elephant Island. He peered through a telescope at the shore, and counted the figures one by one. 1, 2, 3, all the way to 22. He bowed his head, and tears fell. All 28 men, not one missing, every single one alive. How did this miracle happen? It was not simply luck. It was Shackleton's leadership. Let us look at 3 of his most critical decisions during this journey. The first was abandoning the ship. When the Endurance began to sink, Shackleton gave the order without hesitation. No one stayed behind to try to save cargo or equipment, because he understood what mattered most. Not the supplies, the people. The second was the voyage of the James Caird. Knowing the risks were enormous, he led that mission personally. He did not assign the hardest task to someone else. He put himself at the front. The third was crossing the mountains. This decision required extraordinary courage, because nobody knew what the odds of survival were. But not crossing meant no hope at all. Shackleton chose the most difficult path, because it was the only path. Throughout the entire ordeal, several qualities defined his leadership. He placed the lives of his men above everything else. He never let his crew see his own fear or despair. He inspired people through action rather than words. He personally took on the most dangerous tasks. He treated every man fairly regardless of rank or position. Management scholars of later generations have studied Shackleton with great admiration. Harvard Business School began including the Endurance Expedition in its MBA curriculum in 1998, using it as a classic case study in crisis leadership. NASA and Google have also incorporated the Shackleton story into their corporate training programs. A man who led a polar expedition more than 100 years ago became a model for modern management. Frank Wilde later offered this assessment of Shackleton: he was the greatest leader I have ever known. Not because he was the smartest, not because he was the strongest, but because he was willing to set aside his own ambitions and devote himself completely to serving his team. Shackleton never stopped seeking adventure. After the Imperial Trans-Antarctic Expedition, he continued moving forward. In 1921, at the age of 47, he set out for Antarctica once more. This would be his 4th Antarctic expedition. But the journey had barely begun when fate intervened. On January 5, 1922, while anchored at South Georgia Island, Shackleton suffered a fatal heart attack. He was 47 years old. His old friend Frank Wilde arranged for him to be buried on South Georgia Island. That small island he had once crossed mountains to reach became his eternal home. What Shackleton left behind is not only that breathtaking story of survival in the ice. It is a spirit, in the moments of deepest despair, still choosing to believe, still choosing to move forward, still choosing to put others before yourself. Perhaps in our own lives, We will never face the frozen seas of Antarctica. We will never struggle through blizzards at -40 degrees. But we will all face our own moments of crisis. And in those moments, think of Shackleton. Think of those 28 men, adrift on the frozen ocean, leaning on one another, never giving up. One person's courage can ignite hope in 27 others. A truly great leader does not stand at the top looking down. A truly great leader walks at the front, leading everyone through the darkness. That is the story Shackleton tells us. Thank you for walking through this history with Jenny today. See you next time.